Looks like it's particles of light or something. Maybe it's these cataracts I got making it look that way.
Brother Jordan, there's always been a discussion here in the state of Texas about the pronunciation of your name. You pronounce it one way, and we pronounce it another. I would like to know where the difference in the pronunciation originated.
I don't know where it originated. I've always maintained that those of us that was poor called ourselves Jordan, and those rich ones called themselves Jordan, and I'm one of the most Jordans that I know of anywhere when it comes to finances. But to explain, I'm originally from Georgia, as you well know, and over there, during all of my lifetime, well, it was pronounced Jordan, and as far back as I know, that's the way they pronounced it. And down in East Texas, here down around Silsby, in that area there, it's just full of Jordans. As you and I know, when we went down there to Snow River Lodge that time and rededicated the building, or whatever we did, that 100-year building. So the people, by and large, in the South, pronounce it Jordan, and it's spelled Jordan.
So otherwise, we here in Texas haven't really learned the English language yet.
Well, you learn how to spell, but you hadn't learned how to talk yet. That's what it all gets down to. I've been trying my best for the last 30-something years to teach you that, Bill, and you know you hadn't learned yet.
You've almost had that much trouble in teaching masonry, too, haven't you?
Yeah, I surely have.
For the record here, Brother Jordan, and I think lots of the members of the Grand Lodge of Texas would like to know that I know that you served in the United States
I was
services,
in the Air Force, yeah.
Air Force services, and have quite a record there. Just give us a brief rundown on services.
Well, I went into the Air Force in 1942, the early part of 42, and I became a navigator. And in 1943, and along September or October, right in there, well, I landed in England. We went over aboard a ship called the Queen Mary, incidentally, and it went by itself. We didn't have any escort or anything else. And while there, well, I flew 30 missions. At first, about the first 5 or 6, we had absolutely no fighter support. And and my crew was the only one out of 32 crews that finished their missions intact as a crew. The 32 crews of us that went over together. And for that, well, I received because I was lucky enough, and that's strictly the reason, because I was scared to death all the time I was there, I did receive, and anybody else that was lucky enough to finish their missions at that time received several air medals. I received an air medal with 3 oak leaf clusters and the Distinguished Flying Cross, and my group received the Presidential Unit Citation for a raid on January the 11th when we went into Oschersleben, which was west of Berlin, I guess about 100 miles or something like that. But that in effect, and I came back into the States here in 1944, and I eventually wound up at Ellington Field right out of Houston, and that's where I met Vivian, my wife, my latest wife, and the only wife I ever had or ever will have. And we got married in 45 and have 3 fine daughters. And it's the funny thing that now my number 2 daughter Dana and her two sons and her husband are over there in Frankfurt, Germany, and I bombed Frankfurt either twice or three times. I forget which it was. So we're friends now, but they sure wasn't friendly that when we went in there before.
It's my understanding, Brother Jordan, that your crew was the first crew that dropped bombs on Berlin.
Wasn't the first crew. We were in the first wave that went over. Yes, we were in the first. We were in the first. We were in the lead group of the first division of the 8th Air Force on that first raid into Berlin. So we were just about as close to the first one that dropped on Berlin as you could get, I suppose. And I made the first 6. My crew made the first 6 raids on Berlin, and I haven't run into anybody yet that was in that war that made the first 6, except my particular crew. I know there was others because there was lots of us when we went over, but that was about the size of it. I got married, as I said, to a girl in Texas here from Houston, and went back to Georgia when I was discharged in 1945. We went back over there to Georgia, and I almost froze to death, to tell you the truth, and couldn't wait to get back to Texas. And now my wife has to almost beat me to get me to even go back to Georgia for a visit. I loved the state at that time, but I love Texas best. This is where I've been, and that's where I plan on being.
Brother Jordan, you were initiated into Houston Lodge. And just a brief history of your career into being a past master of Houston Lodge, which we all know that you are a past master of Houston Lodge 11, 8, and 9.
Well, I was most fortunate. I know everybody thinks that they belong to the best lodge in Texas, which I'm sure that I belong to the best lodge in Texas, and I hope that everybody that's watching feels the same way about their lodge. But I asked a man by the name of Don Matranga. You remember Sally Matranga?
Right.
She got to be the worthy
past grand matron.
Yeah, of Texas, but Don and Sally were the first 2 people that I met in Texas, other than after I was married, other than my in-laws. And so I asked him for a petition, and he was nice enough to give me one, and I became I was initiated, passed, and raised on. I was raised on August the 14th. No, September the 14th. September the 14th, 1954. And it was masonry had always attracted me, been attractive to me, because my daddy was the finest man I think I ever knew, and he was a mason, and I always thought that. And in fact, he was past master of a small little lodge over in Molina, Georgia, where I grew up. He was past master 12 times of that particular lodge, and then when he became ill and couldn't continue to work in the lodge, it eventually demised. But so it appealed to me, and after I got into it, it appealed to me even more, and I hit the ground running, so to speak, and eventually got into the Scottish Rite, and I love to work on the stage, a whole lot of ham in me, and I suppose, and so then I eventually became master of Houston Lodge in 1962, and in 1968, well, Brother J.W. Chandler made me a district deputy, and I served as district deputy for that year that J.W. was Grand Master. And then the bug hit me. You all came to me in about 1968 or 9 and asked me if I'd let my name be put up for the Grand South, and I fortunately was elected there too, and eventually became Grand Master. while I'm talking, and before I forget it, because I like to talk about myself, but I want to talk about this man right here, Bill Hines, for just a little bit. I have had the good fortune of knowing Bill for many, many years, and when I was Grand Master, well, I appointed him as Grand Marshal. He'd already been Grand Junior Steward and had been Grand Senior Steward and of the Grand Lodge of Texas under other Grand Masters, and I appointed him Grand Marshal and depended on him. He was really the brains behind any success that I might have had as Grand Master. I was very fortunate in realizing how little I know, and I say that with all the modesty that I don't have as a general rule. But I appointed people around me that were tops in their particular field, and I had a man by the name of Clint Blaylock, who was chairman of the Masonic Education and Services, and Bill Hines here, who is past master of Gus A. Brandt Lodge and presently secretary of Houston Lodge number 1189, and E.P. Manny D. is Grand Senior Deacon, and W. Paul Harris as the Grand Chaplain. And each one of those men was far more capable, in my opinion, of being Grand Master than I was, but I was the one that was had drawn the short straw, so I made them have to do all the work. So any success I have, a great deal of Bill here and Adele, his wife, traveled with my wife and I for 4 years, well, really 5 years, wasn't it, Bill? All over the state of Texas, and which is the greatest state on the face of the earth, and got the finest people in it that I ever saw. And it was such a, I wished every Mason in Texas could be Grand Master, so they would appreciate the brethren in this fine state as I do. While and thinking about that, I think about a few things that happened while we were doing all this traveling that I was talking about. Back in March, I believe it was, of 1974, well, Duncan Howard, who was the Grand Master before me, I believe Duncan was the one, Bill, that started these regional conferences. Yeah, Jack Hightower was before Duncan, and Jack, I don't believe Jack had those
Duncan,
things.
we started them.
Duncan started them, that's right. And so we had, he had, I don't know how many, he had 6 or 8, and I had about 10, didn't I? I believe it was 10 or 11 regional conferences all over the state. And I had Manny D. and Bill Hines and Clint Blaylock and Paul Harris. Am I leaving anybody out, Bill? I'm getting old and feeble-minded.
I don't think.
I don't think so. Anyhow, I had those people that went with me everywhere I went to these regional conferences, and they did all the work. They presented papers on various subjects, and it was very well received. Well, we down there, I believe it was on the 9th of March, somewhere right along in there, 1974, well, we had a conference. It was going to be at about 1:30 or 2 o'clock up at Amarillo. And Byron, being a pilot, you'll appreciate this. We leased a plane with a pilot, and I was flying in the co-pilot's seat. It was a single-engine aircraft, and we all got in that plane and left Houston. It was just a beautiful day, and the further north we got, the more the clouds got into the act, and we stopped and got gas, and I forget where it was that we gassed up, and then the further we got towards Amarillo, the worse the clouds were. Tremendous thunderstorms, cumulonimbus, I believe they're called, and just everywhere. Well, when we got up there, we had planned to land at a field,
Tumbleweed.
which was
Tumbleweed.
Tumbleweed.
I believe
was at the airport. It was right close to the lodge that we were going to hold this conference, and but by that time we were really in the thick of this, in the clouds on instruments, and we had a young man there, wasn't but about 21 or 2 years old, that was a pilot, and I thank the Lord that he had the reflexes he did. And it was the weather was so bad that the Continental, I believe it was Continental Airlines, they made a pass and then had to go around. Well, this boy made about 2 passes, and all this is on instruments, and they was talking him in, and finally we came down and broke out at about, I'd say, not over 30 feet, and I looked down there, and we were going across the runway. The runway was going this way, and we were going across it that way. And this boy saw it at the same time, and he did a steep turn right there. I tell you, I like to have a heart attack thrown up. He laid that thing right up on the wing, just like that. Right, and he wasn't. You know what they'd do, Byron? They'd slip. All they had to do is just do that, and sit it down. And when he did, he set it down on the runway, and then the tower ground control asked him where he was, and he said he didn't know, and they said, well, whatever you do, says, watch out, says there's a Phillips 66 tank truck out there on the airport out there somewhere that's lost, and we don't know where he is. And we had to taxi all the way down to the end of the runway, and then we said we was at the end of the runway. The guy said, well, follow the fence. So we had to follow the fence. You couldn't see the tower. You couldn't see anything. It was like a London fog or something other. And we got on back up there and to the hangar and got out. This is at the main airport there in Amarillo. And we got out, and all of us were delighted to be there. And I had a district deputy up there by the name of Bruner. And Brother Bruner was in his 80s. And they had come over to pick us up to take us to the lodge where the people were waiting. We were about 30 minutes late by that time because we had really been in a mess. And Brother Bruner, I was sitting on the front seat, and I don't know, it was 2 or 3 in the back seat back then. We was running down the freeway up there, and Brother Bruner had his head turned around, looking back, talking all the time, talking in the back seat. He wasn't he didn't have no idea where he was in the spirit. And I looked up, and there was a car parked up there on the freeway for some reason. The other night, I hollered at Brother Bruno, and he swerved and missed that thing. Well, I think we came close to getting killed on that freeway than we did in that aircraft. But anyhow, that was a very memorable experience. We came back after the conference. Well, we came back, and the young man who was a pilot, it got cold, tremendously cold. They had hail, and they had pictures in the paper. There was hail would, man hold about 5 of those hailstones, about all he could hold in his hands like that. Those things as big as baseball. And so somehow when they started to pull the plane out, they wiped out that radar equipment or whatever it was he had there in the front end of it. So he said, y'all just going to have to stay here. We'll have to stay here until tomorrow to get this thing fixed. And so then he talked to his people in Houston, the pilot did, and they said for us to get on a plane, they'd reimburse us for flying the next day and to back down by a commercial airline. And this boy was about to freeze to death, and we took him on. We went on over to the motel and checked in there and had a small libation to try to offset fear and freezing all at the same time. And this boy, this young man as a pilot, got to talking to us about masonry. And when we got back, well, he petitioned my lodge and was eventually initiated, passed, and raised in Houston Lodge. So that was an experience. I'll tell you, that was almost like going out to Alpine that time. Bill went out there to Alpine, and Doyle Webb was flying us in his plane, and went out there to level the cornerstone for that lodge building in Alpine, new lodge building they had, and we got to San Angelo, was it?
San Angelo.
Got to San Angelo, and the clouds kept coming in, and so Doyle Webb was flying us, and Doyle said he wasn't any problem. He said that he could just follow a railroad track. He told me, he showed me on the map. He said, see that railroad track just runs right down to the end of the runway, which it does, to the Alpine Airport. And we got lower and lower and lower. And Bill Hines, said that's the first time in his life he ever looked up and saw cows up over him, which he did. We was just right down on top of the tracks. And we flew all the way on into Alpine and got in there and did this thing for Hal Burnett. And so we had some experiences. Bill, here one time we went down to Pearsall, and that was wasn't that 100 year? I think they celebrated the 100-year thing or something, and they were going to have a big banquet, and the only place I suppose that they could find to have it was in kind of a honky-tonk kind of affair, and I had forgot about it. Bill, what was it the people? What did the
people that were going to have the barbecue and the food, they had beer and liquor bar and everything set up, and when they couldn't find that they couldn't serve liquor and sell the beer with this barbecue, they all walked out and picketed.
They picketed this beer joint, and then I think the lights went off too. Somewhere in there the lights went out, or they cut them out, or something.
They cut them out, and they had to go out.
Yeah.
They had to go out and pay them to put them back on, I think.
Yeah, I don't know.
And if you remember, Vivian and Adele and some of the other Masonic ladies, widows there, as I call them, they had to do all the serving.
Yeah, you had to kind of play it by ear, everything that you did.
But after you are through being Grand Master, after serving as Grand Master, then you came back and started working in Houston Lodge. Just for a short wrap-up of this thing, I know, and members of Houston Lodge know, of the many, many people that you've worked in the lodge. Just a short wrap-up on your service now to, as we call it, to Blue Lodge Masonry.
Well, I do it, of course, like all of us do it. It's I suppose you'd call it a labor of love. I enjoy teaching. I've taught a number of people their certificate work. After you've been Grand Master, there's nothing left as far as glory is concerned. There's nowhere else you can go except to where you feel like you're needed the most. And I have felt like that a lot of us have become so involved in other bodies of masonry that we sometimes forget the Mother Lodge, and I enjoy the work. I still enjoy it. I love to teach certificate work. I think I know the esoterical work as good as any man in Texas, and that's no brag. It's just I was fortunate enough to be born with a mind that kind of remembers things like that. Even I can't remember what happened yesterday, but I certainly do remember the work, having taught it as much as I do. So that's what I'm doing almost totally now, is working in the Blue Lodge. I have, as you know, I worked for many, many years in the Scottish Rite on the stage. At one time I was in about 6 degrees, and in the Shrine, and just about everywhere else. But it all gets back to the Blue Lodge, and that's where I'm spending whatever time I have left is going to be working in the Blue Lodge.
You do have candidates come into your office nearly every morning, 5 days a week, that you teach the first part of the morning. Those that
Yeah.
can come in the morning and late in the evening to come by your office and put in an hour or two.
That's right. I certainly have. There've been some, and it's getting to where it almost breaks my health down, that I've had two in this about the last 3 or 4 years that have become, they got into masonry at an age of 60 or over, and I find that their mind is not near as receptive as it probably was 25 or 30 years ago. And I have found this, though, that those two that I can think of in particular, they seem to appreciate more than anybody I ever saw, and it's a good thing that they do, the effort it takes. You just have to go on and on and on and repeat and repeat and repeat. It just takes probably 5 times as long to teach. It took me that 5 times as long to teach them as it usually does.
Brother Jordan, do you have any further comments you'd like to make?
No, no, I don't. I express my appreciation to you, Bill, for all the help and assistance that you've given me and to the Masons of Texas. I express my gratitude for having allowed me to serve as their Grand Master. To any of you that happen to be looking at this and listening to this point, well, I certainly hope that you will get out of Masonry if you are a Mason. I hope you get out of Masonry as much as I have. I don't know my life would have been so very, very empty, comparatively speaking, without it, and I'm sure every Mason feels that way.
I'm going to make one statement to close this thing. You remember one time we were on a trip riding somewhere, and you were telling about one flight, especially when you came back from Germany with just one engine.
Yes.
That the Lord evidently left you here. He had something, some purpose, or some job for you to do. And I'd like to close it. If it hadn't have been for Brother Jordan, at a certain period, that people that were in the know at that time, the Grand Lodge of Texas, that I feel certain that the Grand Lodge of Texas wouldn't have been in the position that we're in today, that there would have been the biggest rift in Masonry that ever happened in the United States if it hadn't been for Brother Jordan's courage to, in the Texas vernacular, is to take the bull by the horns and do what he did do. So, in my opinion, that Brother Jordan was one of the greatest Grand Masters the Grand Lodge of Texas ever had.
Thank you, Bill. I can tell that my brainwashing has paid off for a little bit anyhow, and I appreciate you, Byron, for taking your time to do this recording, and the Committee on Masonic Education and Service. I certainly appreciate your whoever idea of doing this. I certainly am grateful to you too. Thank you very much.
I don't believe Byron's in here.
I don't know. Is he here?
Yeah, he is.
I can't see.
I'm blind as a bat.
I am too, just blind as a chicken.